Everybody, welcome into the Go 24/7 podcast. I am Glenn West. That is Sonny's ship. Sonny, we 5 days into fall camp now, man. We are in full football mode, and talking season is over. We're gonna get to all of our early fall camp thoughts here in a minute, but just for starters, would love it if you guys could hit the subscribe button here on our YouTube channels or on our Spotify, Apple, wherever you're listening to your podcast. It really helps us out if you hit subscribe and like the channel. So, with that being said, Sonny, we've got a lot to dive into today. LSU opened up fall camp last Tuesday, Wednesday, somewhere around there. They've had about 5 days of practice now. We've been out there for, I want to say, three full practices and maybe a smidge of others. And so we've gotten a good sample size of what this team has looked like here in the first week or so of camp. Just I guess early thoughts on what you saw. You were out there with me on Saturday covering the offense. I was out there on the defensive side of the ball. But just your overall just takeaways, I guess, from what you've heard and what you've learned through 5 days of fall camp from LSU.
Well, I think the first thing you do is you look at, what you can actually see. We talk to people and we talk to sources all the time, and look, just like Garrett Nussmeyer went from 6'2" to 6'1" on the roster somehow. Sometimes we get things that aren't exactly true, and so it's nice to be able to actually just look and form some opinions off of what you see. And I think the thing that jumps out at me the most is when I went back and looked at the roster and the updated heights and weights from the spring to now, same was on
Yeah.
so many guys. And I think that what that shows is that Brian Kelly's really harped on, they started this process in January, and the days of seeing guys come in and lose 12 pounds, lose 15 pounds, gain 14 pounds, gain 17 pounds, and all of that, I think those days are I don't want to say over, but I think it's a testament to LSU sports and nutrition and science department, and how well they've gotten these guys into the physical shape that they wanted them in. But then it's about maintaining. And when for anyone who spent time in the gym and worked out knows that once you reach a level, to maintain that level can sometimes be as difficult as it is to reach that level, because you may not be as motivated, you may not have as much driving you. And so that's the first thing that jumps out at me, is just looking at this team as a whole. Physically, they look there. And then when you just hear when you hear them communicating with one another, when you hear the coaches communicating, there just seems to be an air of confidence out on the practice fields. Not complacency, not arrogance, but it just seems to be an air of confidence. And I think that comes from, having 12 guys back from last year who have starting experience, and then adding well over double digit guys who have, more than 20 starts at Power Four programs. So that's the thing that really jumps out at me, is just the air of confidence that you seem to feel around those fields and around the program right now.
Yeah, I think the confidence is a good thing to bring up here because I do feel like when you go out there, it looks like a veteran team that's practicing. It doesn't look like a team that's, only been together for 4 or 5 months. I think they've
Kind of a
really
pro
poured.
field.
Yeah, they've poured a lot into that since those guys arrived, and we talked to players on Monday or Tuesday, I can't remember exactly when, but we asked them about kind of the connectivity of this group and how that's maybe quickly evolved in a very short amount of time. And they said, well, all these guys that have come in that are brand new, like the veterans in particular out of the portal, they're here with one goal in mind, and that's to help LSU win a championship. And they've really instilled that mindset since the very beginning of fall camp, or since the very beginning of meetings back in January, February, before they could even get on the field together. So I think it's certainly moving in that right direction of, from a chemistry off the field perspective. And now what we're getting a chance to see, I think, is how that relays on the field. And I think you're seeing some really positive signs in a lot of different areas. I think for me, one of the big things that stood out through 5 days of camp is I think this defense is legitimately improved from where they were in previous seasons. I think that they've made some really big strides up on the defensive line. You see guys like Jack Pyburn, like Bernard Gooden, the new transfer they got from the summer, Patrick Payton, Jamari Butler, some of these new pieces that they brought in. These guys are all talking. They're all very aggressive. They're very feisty. And they're bringing a different kind of attitude, I think, to this defensive front. And honestly, through 5 days of just us going out there and watching, that's been the group that has been the most impressive. And I think that's carrying over from what we saw in the spring. I mean, the spring session, I remember we all left thinking that the defensive line was the big winners of that camp, and but I think through 5 days here, they've certainly stepped up and have been the most disruptive group. I think from either offense or defensive side of the ball, they've been the most impressive, and I think Gooden has a lot to do with that. I think he's been maybe the MVP of the entire first week of camp. He's really been disruptive. He's been right in the middle of everything that this offense is trying to do, and really setting the tone, I think, on that defensive side of the ball with the way that he plays and the physicality that he has on the field. So I do want to kind of just shift it over to you for a second and ask, you were spending a lot of time with the offense there, on Saturday and have, really devoted a lot of time to looking at that side of the ball. What maybe have you seen? Because I think maybe the first 5 or 6 days of practice, kind of the common theme or the overarching theme has been like, this offensive line is not ready yet, or this offensive line has a lot of work to do to get to that Clemson game to be ready for that first group. What are you seeing up front on the offensive line? Because we all know if LSU has a chance of going in and winning at Clemson, it's going to have to start in the trenches.
Yeah. Well, I kind of look at it, I guess, this way that if you played on the offensive or defensive trenches when you were younger, your eyes probably gravitated to the offensive or defensive lines. While I may look like an offensive lineman now, I was a skill position player way back in the day, and so your eyes always want to kind of go
Yeah.
there. But looking at the offensive line, you mentioned some good points there, and I'll say this is that I don't think LSU's offensive line will face a better defensive line than they face in week one.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, I think this offensive line is going to have some issues with Clemson. I think that defensive line is that good going on the road. You've got guys like Weston Davis going to be making he's going to be making his first start on the road in a hostile place like that. Tyree Adams only has a couple of starts under his belt, so that's going to be tough on your two edge protectors. But going up against LSU's defensive line in camp, I think is probably as good of a recipe to get this group ready as you could possibly ask for. Because the thing that I really like, and I'm going to jump around from the offensive to defensive line for a second here, but the thing I really like about the defensive line is that it gives Blake Baker different weapons. You've got your run stuffers. You've got Zion Williams at 360, Sadir Mitchell in the 350 range. You got Jacoby and Guillory at 320. You got Bernard Gooden at 270
Yeah.
in there causing havoc,
Yeah.
as a defensive tackle. And you look at your ends, you got Patrick Payton, Jack Pyburn, you got Jamari Butler. You've got different guys to where you can run a bigger variety of packages. And I think when we saw Blake Baker last year and we saw him line up in that, I don't know what they call it, but I call it the I formation on defense, to where they lined Whit Weeks and had four guys lined up in a row and they all went different ways. Nobody knew where they were going to go, but you only saw that a couple of times, a few times. I think you're going to see a lot more special packages from Baker this year, to where he's going to be able to move Perkins around. He's going to be able to have some different guys in there on the defensive line that is going to create some unique opportunities for LSU. Now, having to go up against all that in camp is really going to help this LSU offensive line. But the thing that I worry about the most going to Clemson is communication.
Yeah.
You know, how are they going to be able to communicate in that stadium? Braylon Moore has played there. Josh Thompson's played in some big stadiums before too, but it's still going to be their first game in a purple and gold uniform. There's going to be some jitters. There's going to be some nerves. So how that group is able to communicate, I think is going to be big. Having Caden Durham with an extra year under his belt to help him pick up some blitzes, I think is going to help. I think what we've seen from Joe Sloan so far, and you can agree or disagree with me, but I think we're going to see a lot more motion out
Yeah.
of the receivers this year,
Yeah.
and a lot more of, instead of just running. Last year, I think the run game was kind of lazy in calls. I think it was kind of like, okay, let's run zone here, let's run zone here. But I think this year you're gonna see receivers coming in motion, pulling the defense over a little bit. Are they going this way? Or are they going that way? And so those are all things that I think are going to help this offensive line. But how are they able to communicate in
Yeah.
Memorial Stadium? That's going to
Yeah.
be a big test for this group. But whatever happens in that game against Clemson, LSU's offensive line could come out and they could stink it up, give up 7 sacks, not create any run holes, whatever. It will be, by the end of the season, I do feel like this group will be better than last year's group was overall. And that's a
Yeah.
lot because you had a lot of NFL talent on that
We had 4
offensive
draft
line.
picks. Yeah. Yeah.
But I just feel like when I look at the offensive line last year, I just feel like it underperformed.
Yeah.
I
No,
feel
I
like
I
it
agree.
underperformed, and this group right here, I kind of wonder with this group is you've got the young pieces and you've got a couple of veterans who are coming in from other places trying to prove themselves. I just wonder if these young guys aren't if they're not going to be able to build a little more chemistry and a little more camaraderie because you don't have any leaders on this line.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, I
And
think
so
last
everybody's
year's
trying to prove something.
yeah,
Everybody's trying to prove something.
I think last year's offensive line didn't meet the expectations that they had going into the year. Like, I think many people had billed that as one of the premier offensive lines in the country, and they were going to perform like that. And there were some bumps and bruises there. I think that you saw in the run game, you saw with the penalties, the self-inflicted mistakes that they had at times. And so maybe that's an area where LSU can really centralize their focus on with this offensive line. The one thing I will say, we've gotten a chance to see these offensive line and defensive line drills where they go one on one against each other. I was charting all of them a couple days ago, and they've been doing it really every practice since. Um, the offensive line individually, like just one on one, Tyree Davis against Tyree Davis, Tyree Adams against Patrick Payton, or Weston Davis against Gabriel Relaford. The offensive line is more than holding its own in those one-on-one drills. And I think to your point, when you get to that Clemson game, it's just going to be about, can those individuals play as one? I think that's where LSU is right now, because when they go from one-on-one to 11 on 11, you're seeing that it's a lot different. And the defensive line is kind of having its way with slowing the run game down, with getting pressure on Nussmeier. And I think that's just going to take a little bit of time here over the next couple weeks. And I think it's going to be imperative for that group to really kind of come together as a unit, as a five. And the one thing I will say is that they have settled in on a five. Like, I think that they have had a consistent five of Tyree Adams at left tackle. They've had DJ Chester at left guard. By the way, Chester is a guy who has 13 years or 13 games of starting experience now as well. So that's another feather in the cap for this O line to have a guy that has SEC experience. Braylon Moore is at center. Josh Thompson's at right guard. Weston Davis is at right tackle. I think it's going to take something pretty extreme for one of those guys to lose their job at this point. So I think that they have settled in on an offensive line that you could very well see for the Clemson game. And the fact that they have done that within the first week of camp now gives them the runway here over the next 4 weeks before that game to really develop that camaraderie, that chemistry together as a first team unit. So it's still to be determined, of how quickly that group can come together for that Clemson game. But I think that they're heading in the right direction. And the fact that they have a starting five is really impressive, here early in fall camp, that they can really settle in on. So I guess we can just kind of jump around here. I know we've already done that a little bit with the offensive and defensive line stuff, but just some other takeaways that I've had just over watching the first 3 or 4 days of camp. This receiver group is loaded, man. Like, they are not going to have a shortage of talent at wide receiver going into this season. You know, you talk about Aaron Anderson, who only practiced on the first day, should be back on Wednesday. Missed 4 or 5 days of practice with dealing with some knee inflammation, but he's going to be back in the fold. Xavier Thomas has had some great moments. Chris Hilton's had some good moments. Nussmeier is really spreading the ball around here to a lot of these guys. Destin Hill is the guy that we rarely talked about in the offseason, but I think has been, a pretty consistent piece for them in that first, second team range when he's getting those opportunities. And then, the two transfers, Nick Anderson and Barian Brown. Barian Brown's had some nice moments, but really Nick Anderson for me started day one with not even participating in 11 on 11. He was going through concussion protocol, didn't really have, the burst that you wanted to see there on that first day. But it was by design. And by the second or third practice, he was getting first team reps with Nussmeier, with all those guys. And so, and making plays. He's making plays in 7-on-7. He's been targeted in 11 on 11. He's winning some one-on-one battles. He had one-on-one battle with Monsieur Delane a couple days ago where he just went up and just outreached the ball for him, just went up and go get it kind of thing. And that's the kind of thing that I think he brings to this offense that maybe nobody else does. He's 6'3", 6'4". He's got length. He's got size. He's got physicality. It's really just this offseason been about can they get him healthy? And I think you're starting to see Nick Anderson get a little healthier, and he's fulfilling, I think, what LSU needs from him at that spot. And so I think wide receiver is a group that really has stood out to me in the first 4 or 5 days. Nussmeier, like I mentioned, is spreading the ball around. Even tight ends, Bauer Sharp and Tradez Green. You mentioned the motions here that they're going to be working with the offense. I think I've seen the tight ends motion probably more than any other position here in the first 4 or 5 days. And so whether that's with Tradez and Bauer Sharp on the field together, or just one of them solo as a single tight end. So there's a lot of different things that they're trying to work in with this passing game right now, and they have no shortage of options. They have so many guys that I think are going to be able to help this offense move in a more positive direction, even from last year when you had the number 6 ranked passing offense in the country or something like that. So just your thoughts on maybe some skills positions, or if you want to flip it over to the defensive side of the ball, is there anything that you're seeing just in terms of just skills guys, or anybody that has really stood out to you at this point in fall camp outside of just the trenches?
When I look at the offense, I guess obviously the depth at the wide receiver position, like you mentioned, I mean, that's something that is definitely going to play a big factor, I think, with this offense. And I think from a depth perspective, I probably feel better about the first 22 on offense. Maybe, honestly, maybe as good as I've ever felt.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at, you mentioned the first 5 offensive linemen. I mean, Paul Mabinga, Carius Kern, Bo Bordlawn, Cohen Eccles. Those are guys that they're very high on right
Yeah.
there.
And
Freddie Shepard.
Kelly did say yesterday that Eccles and Mubanga are rotating in at the guard spots with the first team. So those
Yeah,
those jobs aren't settled yet, but we have
right.
seen more with
Yeah,
Thompson and with
but you
Shep.
feel better.
Yeah,
You feel better if something happens, because
of
those
course.
all 5 are not going to stay healthy all year.
Sure.
There's going to
Yeah.
be some bumps. There's going to be some bruises. The one position, I guess, the one position that to me is a little unsettling from a depth perspective, would be running back.
Yeah.
But seeing Juwan Johnson get some opportunities there, and seeing what he can do with the ball in his hands, I mean, I think if you're in a situation to where you have to use your 5th back and it's him,
Hmm.
I feel okay with that.
Yeah.
I feel okay with that. Looking at the depth on the other side of the ball, I feel just as good about the defensive line. I mean, I think your first 8 defensive linemen are interchangeable in a lot of ways. A
Yeah.
lot of ways. You
Yeah,
look at your linebackers, I mean, you could, I think you could look at you could potentially look at 7 linebackers and say, okay, Tylen Singleton was even getting some first team reps, and he was a guy who I was kind of worried about. Okay, is he going to stick around after not getting much action and stuff, and then kind of adjusting to growing into and learning to play the linebacker position? Um, and then obviously the secondary, there's so much depth back there in the secondary. So, you take that first 22 on offense, then you take that first 22 on defense. Now all of a sudden you're like, man, you're
yeah,
talking about, you've got more than half of your scholarship players that you're feeling good about,
yeah,
that you're like, okay, if these guys need to get on the field, I'm okay with that.
yeah.
Think about last year and the year before, that once you got past that 22, you had some reserves and stuff, but man, it wasn't nearly the
It was looking
comfort
thin. It
level.
was looking thin in a lot of different
Yeah.
positions. Defensive tackle in particular really comes to mind. You were really relying heavily on that freshman duo, Ahmad Bro, Dominic McKinley, and I think they're taking that next step and using that experience from last year. So maybe there's a good grain of salt in there of going through those wounds as freshman players. But I like what you said there about linebacker and the safety and the secondary group, because I think probably right now that's honestly the group that has been the most interesting in terms of how they're rotating guys in and out. Whit Weeks has been he. There was one day there where Whit Weeks was not doing contact work, and you mentioned Tylen Singleton getting the first team reps there. I've really liked what they've done with their linebackers. Like the the practice that we saw on Monday was as good as I've seen Harold Perkins look in 3 years. I mean, he was like all over the place at that star position. He was really getting in Nussmeier's backfield and pressuring him. He baited Nussmeier into an interception early in the 7-on-7 action, blew up a screen pass to Bauer Sharp at kind of coverage situation where he just read the play beautifully, and that would have been a play that went for no gain. Like I think Perkins they finally found that spot for him, and we'll see if he can build on that performance from Monday in the days and weeks ahead. But he's moving great, and that's the other thing I really wanted to kind of touch on is just injuries and guys that maybe had some offseason deals that have looked okay or looked pretty good in this fall camp so far. Perkins is certainly at the top of that list. He's moving great. Whit Weeks is a guy that I don't think are stressing too much right now with their contact drill work. I mean, he was out there on Monday doing team drill work and I guess tackling, but they weren't really tackling yet. You're kind of still in their shells period of fall camp, and they get started with the full pads here on Tuesday. But Weeks is a guy that they're working back slowly, but he's been active every day. He's been participating in something every day. Seems to be moving okay from what I can see. Jordan Gilbert had the shoulder surgery here in the offseason. He's somebody that they've really had in the back half of the defense that's getting a lot of first team action, a lot of second team action, and that's certainly something to keep watch of. And then Jacobian Guillory is another guy on the interior. Doesn't really look like anything's phasing him right now. He looks to be completely back from that Achilles injury. They're working him in with first and second team reps as kind of that run stuffer in the middle there. So he's going to be a hefty part of this rotation as well on the interior D line. So those are just kind of the four guys that maybe kind of coming into the fall that we were most curious about from an injury perspective and how they might look. So I just wanted to touch on that for a little bit. But to your point about just the numbers that they have at linebacker, at cornerback, at safety, like they're rotating a lot of those guys in and out. I mean, Tylen Singleton, he's been getting first team reps. Devon Keys has kind of mostly been with the second team, maybe gets occasional first team reps, but it's mainly been Wes Weeks, Whit Weeks, and Tylen Singleton that I've seen with the first team at those inside linebacker spots. And so that's a very interesting development there, because you're right. Tylen Singleton was like kind of that guy that we didn't really know what to expect coming into the fall. What role was he going to fill?
Is he a
Kind of thing.
safety? Is he a
Yeah,
linebacker?
yeah.
Like,
Is he
yeah.
a star? Like, I mean, like
Right.
what were they thinking with him? And he's put put on some weight. Like I think you mentioned the weight thing earlier. He's one of the guys that you can tell looks just bigger since he's gotten to campus as a freshman in 2024. So they really, I think, honed it in with him that he's going to be a future inside linebacker, and they're getting him those reps. And then at cornerback, I think Monsieur Delane has made kind of a statement that he's going to be one of those first teamers. They've been having him mainly with the first team boundary corner, and then they've also had him a couple reps at nickel. I've seen them, kind of be a little bit more versatile with him, but I think he's going to be your first team, kind of at the top of the depth chart cornerback. And they're rotating guys like PJ Woodland, Ashton Stamps, DJ Pickett, in and out. Jakeem Jackson's gotten a couple first team reps as well at the other cornerback spot. So that's still very much up in the air, I think, the second cornerback spot and who starts opposite of Delane. And then, the other position is safety. Like I think that they have about five guys, whether it's Deshaun Spears, Jordan Gilbert, AJ Halsey, Javian Toviano, or Tamarcus Cooley, that they feel really comfortable with back there. It's just about figuring out which two play the best together, who's getting those reps. Honestly, it's been about as up in the air in terms of just first team reps as a position can get. They've had Jordan Gilbert back there with AJ Halsey. They've had Marcus Cooley back there with Jordan Gilbert, Marcus Cooley back there with Javian Toviano. Like they've mixed and matched a lot of different combinations at safety. And so I'll be curious to see here over the next week or two what that ultimately looks like going into this thing. So those are just a couple extra final little tidbits, nuggets there. Any final thoughts that you might have, Sonny, on just kind of
Well,
how this thing's looked so far?
I know we're up against the clock because I got to get a high school freshman to freshman
There
orientation
you
here,
go.
but
There you go. School's back.
I'll close it with an old man analogy. You probably didn't do this when you was a kid, but 7, 8 years old late 70s, early 80s. You get a birthday present, you get a Christmas present, you get a little pack of toy soldiers.
Yeah.
These little stationary soldiers, they don't move, they don't do anything. You just position them where you want to position them. Okay. Well, when you get a pack, there's only so much war you can play with that. But
Okay.
when you have a bunch of them, man, you can have a lot of fun with that, right? And I think
Mhm.
that's what we see with Blake Baker right now,
Yeah.
is that he's got so many pieces on defense to where he is actually now able to do those exotic looks, to
Yeah.
do more of what we saw last year of like lining them up in a row and stuff like that. And to have so many different unique skill sets to be able to mold that around, I really think that we're going to see the Blake Baker this year, the Blake Baker defense this year that we kind of thought we were going to get to see last year, but with Perkins kind of, not really selling on a roll and stuff, I don't think Blake ever really got comfortable. And I think it was just kind of trying to piecemeal things.
Right.
Whereas now, and he's probably still staying up late at night, but now instead of scratching his head, wondering what the hell he's going to do, now he's smiling and saying, "What the hell am I going to do?" Because he
Yeah.
knows he's got a lot of options.
Just to kind of piggyback off that a little bit, they had a rotation on Monday that was Harold Perkins, Patrick Payton, Dominic McKinley, Bernard Gooden, and on the other edge was Gabriel Relaford. And they've even done a situation where Jack Pyburn has gone in for Dominic McKinley as the interior defensive lineman, and they've just been rushing the passer with all those
Yeah,
guys. They just pin their ears back and go get the quarterback. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that. They kind of had a package like that last year, but it didn't really, I think, have the same effect that I think it will have this year. So that'll be something to keep an eye on for sure. But all right, well, that'll do it for us here in our first week coverage of fall camp practice. We're going to have much more pods coming y'all's way here now that the season's back in session, and we'll have recruiting updates and things of that nature here over at the site. So make sure you guys are tuned in and following everything over at Go 24/7. That is Sonny Ship. I am Glenn West, and we'll see you guys later in the week.